Sarah, thank you for welcoming us here. Hello, everyone. Thank you for making the time out of what we know is an incredibly busy time for everyone. Thank you. I never take for granted that we have the time to sit together in the same room, to reflect, to learn, to imagine, to envision what is possible. So thank you so much. I have the great honor of welcoming to New York and to the stage someone who is a giant for the movement. I have the great honor of introducing and having a conversation with Stacey Davis Gates, the president of the Chicago Teachers Union. So for people who believe that in this country, a country of so much abundance, every child should have an excellent school, every person should have a safe home, young people should be able to live their lives in freedom and not endure the violence of police or street violence or incarceration. For anyone who believes that our elected officials ought to devote their time and their effort to lift up the priorities and win improvements for the lives of working class people instead of leveraging the power of government in support of those who already have so much. For all of those people, Stacey Davis Gates is a giant and a legend. And I say this because Stacey, as the head of the Chicago Teachers Union, has managed to do something so rare and so hard, which is to serve as the anchor of a power-building process and a movement deeply rooted in working class communities of color and deeply committed to working class people, but smart enough and sophisticated enough to attract the support of the majority of voters in the third largest city, Chicago, to elect a Black father, an educator, and organizer, Brandon Johnson, as the mayor of the city of Chicago. What made that victory possible was a remarkable organizing effort of more than a decade by the Teachers Union, along with the CIU, independent political organizations like United Working Families, community organizing formations like the Grassroots Collaborative, along with a myriad of organizations and progressive individuals and elected officials who represent the beautiful mosaic of Chicago. And coming from New York and being in the role that I am now as the co-director of the New York Working Families Party with my co-director, Jasmine Gripper, who's sitting right there. We know how incredibly fragile that alliance can be and how difficult to sustain it is. The people in Chicago with Stacey at the helm and sharing both community space and struggle have done something that is very hard, which is to build truly a majoritarian coalition. And not just build a coalition, but actually infuse it with the spirit of movement in a way that allowed them to stick together to defeat neoliberal forces at the ballot box and win governing power. I cannot say how hard that is. Trying to do it every day in New York City, I'm just like, how did you do that? But of course, this work didn't happen in a vacuum, right? Chicago has a long, rich history of organizing. We can say the names Fred Hampton and Saul Alinsky, and that sort of tells us a lot of what's at the heart of Chicago's history of struggle and resistance. And Chicago has also been the center of a lot of neoliberal experiments, right? I can say Rahm Emanuel, remember? All of that. Boo. So that incredible organizing effort and movement building effort made Brandon Johnson the mayor. But having a long history of struggle doesn't actually mean that there is an equal level of readiness and practice to wield governing power. And so that's why this conversation today is so important and is so helpful. Because power building is not a sufficient condition for co-governance, but it is a necessary condition. And Stacey Davis Gates and her comrades have been a shining example of this. They have built and sustained power in a really difficult political environment. They succeeded in claiming the mantle of government, and now they are grappling with the challenges of governing. And they are working to make sure that the mayor, who is enduring, incredible attacks, and his administration are able to succeed and deliver for the people. And this is an incredibly hard task. Here in New York, we have had, progressives have had moments where we got to co-govern, maybe for a little bit, with the mayor. I'm speaking about Mayor de Blasio. And we know how hard that can be to sustain and how disorganizing in some ways it is to go from being sort of the forces of the outside to trying to figure out how to be collaborative with the forces inside. And more often than not, the forces of the outside disorganize and sort of fall apart. So we want to understand what are the lessons, what are the reflections, what are the things that we should keep in mind, because this conversation could not be happening in a more opportune time in New York City. All of us who live here have endured so much chaos under the hands of our current mayor, Eric Adams. Not just chaos because of the endless strings of corruption investigations, but just chaos because of his governance. And the press will cover the corruption stories, but what they're not covering is the people who are actually experiencing government not working for them. And that's what we care about. That's what we want to anchor all of our work from, and that's why we want to really honor these incredible opportunity to learn from this legend who brings the heart, the fight, the brilliance to the effort of not just building a powerful union, but actually building a powerful movement and helping us actually meet the promise of this moment. So with that, please help me welcome Stacey Davis Gates.
We're gonna sit, or you want me to stand?
Already, please silence your phones. Thank you.
Oh, how? I'm gonna do that, and then I would just prefer the conversation, actually. So for all of you who came here to get some superstar wisdom, you're in the wrong place. But first I want to say thank you to New York. It is good to be the second city in some things. It is. Because you all have tried this idea of governing from the left. And so you have all these lessons that are absolutely applicable to the experiences that we're having in Chicago right now. So thank you for being first. But even more so, I am honored to stand before everyone in here to tell you that we do not know what the hell we're doing. We don't. And neither has anyone else who's ever done it before. Isn't that comfortable? Isn't it? I love sports, and John Thompson's Georgetown was one of my favorite teams because it was this black man who led unapologetically as a coach, but he didn't just lead as a basketball coach, he led as an example of a leader who said, your rubric for success isn't my rubric of success. So he has this idea that perfection is not necessary to be effective. Perfection is unnecessary to make transformational change. And so I stand here before you to say that we're going to make a whole bunch of mistakes in Chicago because people don't have the right rubric for what we're doing. And they never have. Of course you're impacted by headlines. Of course you're impacted by the chattering political class, the chattering left class. But let me just tell you why it doesn't matter. Because I'm a black woman who is the 4th president of the Chicago Teachers Union. Where do they do that? Where do black women lead 4 times at a very powerful organization? It's tradition. And I get to do it in a very unapologetic way. And that is the blessing of being the leader at CTU, but I'm not the leader at CTU because I want it to be powerful. In fact, this is very uncomfortable because the people who I roll with, we believe in this plural pronoun. So being the singular pronoun is odd and unfamiliar because our power is predicated on plural. You don't get to lead as a black woman in a very stubborn, segregated space if you are leading with me and I. It doesn't exist in that way. It is a multiracial, it is a multi-generational, it is led by women and by men. It's led by people who choose their own pronouns. And that's what makes us powerful. It's not any of the stuff that people read about. It is the struggle to create spaces that are more just and equitable for everyone. That's our secret sauce. And that's why it's so difficult. You've met yourselves before. And we're doing it from a labor working class perspective. In a city that is not just the land of first locals, because we're local 1. Make sure you tell UFT if anybody from UFT there, make sure you let them know that. But we're also in a very highly racialized space. I'm a high school history teacher. I am, yeah, special people. And I lead with other high school history teachers. And we lead not just from the perspective of the working class, but we lead from the perspective of workers. See the difference? Workers bring particular personality and experiences into the working class. And in order for the working class to be more accessible to the worker, you got to see the work, you got to see their experience. So here's the thing. The working class is not a romanticized version of individuals. It is, in fact, a group of people who are struggling to make ends meet all the time. And that struggle is unique based on their positionality with gender and race too. And to be able to have a space in Chicago that struggles with this idea of the dimension of the working class is special. And that's how we get here. Because my union understood that in order for us to get the justice that we need as workers, that we also had to get the justice that we need as tenants or as homeowners, as residents of the west side or the south side of Chicago, as people who live in a very segregated city, who are struggling to own their own spaces, to have agency in these spaces. And so what I will say is that in 2010, a ragtag group of people that I hang out with, a caucus, Brian's laughing, shout out to Brian and Micah who know this story already. We formed a caucus. And we formed a caucus because they kept closing the schools down where we worked. And we did not have an adequate force, defense, clarity about how you do this. And so we got together and we found out that there are very smart teachers who have very good values and even better politics. And then we found other people who weren't teachers but were teacher adjacent, and because they have children in the schools, because they live next door to the schools that were being closed. And then you found organizations like the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, people like G2 Brown, who's an organizer, Jay Travis. These are people who were already struggling against the plans to foreclose on the south side of Chicago, to push black people out. So what we found when we started organizing against school closings is that if you only organize against school closings, you're gonna not see the destruction of public housing. You're not going to see the marginalization of what is affordable. You don't see necessarily the food deserts, the lack of grocery stores and fresh produce. But you do see the gross segregation and how it is both promoted and segregation in Chicago is okay because it still exists. And segregation in Chicago is the reason why we have to fight, because it is the thing that keeps the power that we need to actually transform Chicago out of reach. That's why the teachers union is important, because you have almost 30,000 members who live in every single zip code in that city, because we have to. You have people who live there who don't always share the same politics. So this idea of solidarity is what becomes the vehicle to when you guys say governing power. I'm going to like push on that a little bit. It's not governing power yet. And I don't want to govern that power. I was telling Emma Tai, who's here, we're here together, who was the executive director of the United Working Families, and I'll get there hopefully quickly. I was telling her that we worked for a lot of years to catch a car. You know how the dog barks at the car, and then it goes and it chases after the car? That was us. And in 2023, we caught it. And then we got the keys, and we got in, and we popped the hood and the trunk. Yo, that car is terrible. That car is like, it's terrible. It is awful. And it belongs to us. It's always been terrible, but everyone else puts paint on it. And then they get their friends to tell like stories about this car. And so when we talk about governance, we're talking about a car that has been marginalized by austerity and neoliberal policies that do not reflect the many. Only the few. And it is our car. And then we send one of our best brothers who is an organizer. That's not like the other organizer from Chicago. Y'all invited me. Oops. Brandon is actually an organizer because we got hired on the same day, and we fought against school closings together, and we figured out how to survive Chicago together. So he's a real organizer, and a real organizer getting that car means that we're going to have to figure out if we keep that car, if we fix that car up, or if we say, hey, we're going to buy another one. And that's what's happening in this moment. Everything that you are reading and experiencing is supposed to happen. Do not like get uncomfortable. Oh my God, he needs to get this right. Because if he doesn't get this right, if they don't get this right, we don't get another shot. Maybe. And maybe not. And we get to get it right, and we get to get it wrong. So this whole idea of catering to the Chicago Tribune or the Chicago Sun-Times or Crain's Chicago, I'm a high school history teacher. Did I tell you all that? Yeah. So as a high school history teacher, I'm acutely aware that movements are always panned by legacy media. There is never a time where women fighting for the right to vote were heroes. There was never a time where people fighting for more resources for those afflicted with HIV and AIDS were heroes. There was never a time when we fought for civil rights for anyone in this country where people were heroes. Never. So why would it be now? And why would it be with a black man who's progressive? And why would it be with a movement that's anchored by working class people who also understand the power and the dimension of a multiracial, multi-generational coalition. We are a problem to status quo. And that is what they're telling you. If we got good headlines, then we are not doing it right. Be clear that the headlines indicate effectiveness at contesting the power of marginalization, of segregation, and austerity. So what are the lessons that we're learning? The lessons that we're learning is first that this car is terrible, and we thought it was better. So people have to snap out of it. And that's easier said than done, because you have spent, some of us, a generation working to catch that car. And now you're catching it and you're looking under the hood and you're looking inside and you're just like, I spent my whole career doing this. What is this? And then you have other people who caught the car and don't know how to drive. It's like, I needed to know how to drive? Well, how do you do that? And then you have people who caught the car who have been run over by the car repeatedly. And that car is traumatic. And now their friend is driving it. So now he represents that trauma. Lessons. And these lessons are inappropriate for electoral cycles because you're always running. And in this electoral space that we have in cities, states, counties, and nationally, you got to be popular, you got to be cute, you got to be pithy, you got to be right, you can't be wrong. You can't even have a quality reflection out loud. I am taking a huge risk with this camera and you people here today, having a real honest discussion about what it is and what it ain't. Because now we have the car and the right wing wants to convince everyone else how incompetent we are, how we don't understand it. And then the neoliberals watch it from the sideline so they can catch their thread and say, see, I told you. You can't believe in transformative change. You got to just do it in increments, a little bit. And then you have our team. We're still split on whether we should be in electoral politics at all. Think about the conversation we're having nationally about how we support the vice president against Donald Trump. Now, I get it. And I get that my union doesn't exist with any type of power if Donald Trump is the president again. So the project that we're doing in Chicago, this laboratory that we have to figure out the how you privilege people with equity and justice, that's going to take longer than 4 years. It took longer than 4 years for us to even be in a position to get there. Remember, in 1995, Mayor Daley consolidated power with Republicans to begin the project of renewing Chicago. And he chose schools as the epicenter of that. Because if I close your school, why do you still live in the neighborhood? If I close your school, why do you still live in the neighborhood? And if I privatize your school, you don't have a job. So you can't live in the neighborhood. So then I can renew the parts of the city. Renew, and it's funny, renew it means to raise my rent. Renew means to demolish my building. Renew means to make it cost more. Renew. And so our people in Chicago have been experiencing since 1995, well, before, but I'm going to start my story at 95. They have been experiencing this hyper push out of themselves. So you either lay down or you get down. And so people had ultimatums. They didn't have choice. It wasn't until you get this union, SEIU, you thought I was going to talk about us. It wasn't until we got SEIU to contest the big box with Action Now, which was the acorn of the time, to actually show that there could be a working class movement that could be multi-generational and multiracial. They said, if you bring all of these big box stores here, it's going to have these cascading impacts. They were not wrong. And what it did is that it helped to pilot this idea of coalition and a challenge to machine politics that still have pervasive, far-reaching power in Chicago. And so the lessons learned in that campaign and others is what precipitates this idea that a teachers union could be a part of a coalition and to lead it in a way that is unapologetic, that is black-led, that speaks to the segregation and participates in the 360-degree experience of Chicagoans. We don't just do electoral politics. In fact, the electoral politics is just the cherry on top. It is not the thing we do. We organize. We organize. We struggle with each other, and we pick a lot of fights. And we pick fights to get us to where we need to be. So this idea that you have to just choose one thing and that one thing is pure within the working class, throw that out, you all. Please. Purity is not if it ain't electoral politics. That's not what it is. In fact, the power is in changing the debate, the platform, the things in which we engage on in electoral politics. Jay Travis, black woman, south side of Chicago, born and raised. In 2013, she launches a campaign to save people's pensions, to stop privatization, and to expand democracy by bringing forth an elected school board in the city of Chicago. She runs on everything that she's going to lose on intentionally. We use electoral politics to organize more people to the movement. Because in Chicago, electoral politics is how people tune in. So we were able to use the idea, the opportunity, and the time frame to bring people closer to movement politics. See the difference and the sequence of this? And that is important because what it does is that it fronts the issues first. It creates the capacity with the people you're working with, and then you get to argue, debate, and engage on things that are both natural and pure to you. The hard part is when you start winning, right? When you catch the car. Because your values are in conflict with the austerity that has harmed you already. So how do you both deal with the trauma of austerity, of white supremacy, of segregation in a space that is unrelenting and has been since forever? At the same time, you're trying to build the thing that no one knows can work. Like, there's zero evidence that anything that we're doing right now is going to be permanent, is going to work. The only thing that we know that works is when we work together, things happen. The only thing that we know that is if we keep trying and we have our values in front of us, that we keep getting to the next level of this video game of movement, right? We know that. And so that is what we hold on to. But here's the thing about the other lessons that I'm learning. We can't do it alone in Chicago, which is why I'm here in New York. And thank God you did it first, because y'all got a lot of people with good wisdom and lessons learned. Listen, Chicago kept it to ourselves. I heard Fred Hampton's name called out, and when I hear Fred Hampton's name called out, I think about the courage of a black man at that particular time who said segregation is a problem, and I'm going to Uptown, and I'm going to organize with the white folks there, and I'm going to go to Bridgeport and do the same thing, and then I'm going to go to at the time, Lincoln Park, to find my Puerto Rican folks, and then I'm going to find my, my Mexican brothers and sisters, too, on the Southwest. It's like this vision that got them killed. There's a reason why you don't hear about Chicago, because Chicago is really a tightly controlled, compressed space. The segregation and the penalty for bucking that is tremendous. Harold Washington, Brandon Johnson, 2 different generations. There's a reason for it, you all. And so this idea of me even being in New York and having a discussion with everyone in here about what we have built is a little dangerous. Because if we can do this in Chicago, you can do this in Des Moines, Iowa. You can do it in South Bend, Indiana. You can do it in Jackson, Mississippi. Oop, they're doing it. Right? You can do it anywhere. The thing is that you can't do it like they do it, though. You do need labor. And you do need labor to have a perspective on our world, which means you got to talk to workers. Everyone's a worker. Everyone's a worker. And many times these workers look like me. So you got to ask them questions. Are you in your union? If you are, our community organizations are just as invested in the leadership of our union as those who pay dues. Our community organizations are just as invested in the leadership of our union as those that pay dues, because the coalition is what changes things in Chicago. So lessons learned. Number 1, the car we've been trying to catch, God bless it. God bless it. It is terrible, and it is only propped up by white supremacy, paternalism, and newspapers that subscribe to that. Number 2, that car has had traumatic impact on the people that we need to continue to organize and build power with. And number 3, biggest lesson of all, you get to get it right and you get to get it wrong. And you get to own that and live to fight another day. So now I'm gonna sit down.
That was amazing. Wait, can you hear me? This is working? Straight. Oh. This is working? Better. Okay. Thank you. That was so powerful and so rich. You started by sort of saying you all have met each other, right? You all have been in meetings and in rooms with each other, right? Which I hear as like a real agitation to sort of recognize how we, the people in this room, how people like us sort of behave, like what is our way. And you talked about sort of the power at the center of everything that you have done is the idea that it's not about individual leadership, it's about people experiencing a sense of we, the collective leadership. I'll start with just an observation that we often discuss at the Working Families Party, which is that in many of the spaces of the left, it's true also of any other political space, that often what you find is it's sort of a collection of individuals with very strong opinions and values. And what you almost never find, or is rare, is more rare, is to find an actual collectives of people who are like subsuming the sort of individual desire and opinion to the collective enterprise. And it's not strange that we have this. We live in a country that, you know, elevates the idea of the individual. And we talk about, you know, even in the organizing, sort of like core principles, we talk about self-interest as like the first driving force that brings people to the table. And we talk about self-care. Like we elevate the self above the collective sort of culturally. So I guess the first question before we get into sort of like the politics is like, how have you both in your life in the union and in these coalition spaces that you have helped anchor and create and lead, how do you actually nurture that experience of the collective and that invitation to the collective, which is so intuitive and countercultural to this country?
To capitalism.
Yeah.
Because it is. Capitalism is about my exceptionalism, black excellence, right? That's how we hear it parroted out in my culture recently. Because that's not how other people are winning. Like, look, I'm smart. That's the only way I'm able to be here in this room with you. Look at who's not here, right? I'm already exceptional. I'm one generation removed from the cotton plantations in both Mississippi and Arkansas. I get to Chicago because my paternal grandfather came first, and he was like, yeah, it's a little too fast. He went to Gary. So, like, you follow the migration patterns. I am a product of the Great Migration. So I'm exceptional in the way in which I should not be sitting on this stage. Neither one of us. Like, let's keep it 100. It is not for us to be here within the world system of capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. So we ain't got nothing to lose. So that's the first thing. When people talk about self-interest, I hear that, but I also hear, what do you lose? Nothing? Because what do we have, and how do we assess what we have in this moment? That's the power of how I think the caucus that I belong to, the caucus of rank and file educators, is that they kept closing the schools I was working at.
Yeah.
Right? So as a worker, what do you do with that? As a black woman who is a mother of black children, how do you not be offended by that?
Yeah.
Right? Because they're closing black schools, 50 of them at one time in 2013, Rahm Emanuel. One of the most traumatic experiences that I've ever had in my life. Still suffer, I think, from PTSD. It is the rage that kind of drives a lot of my leadership. That said, you asked the question about how do we struggle with the we and the us. It is just as traumatic in the movement to struggle with we and us as it is outside of the movement. Again, look at this room. I love you all here, but this room don't represent the two women on the stage right now. It doesn't. And there is trauma in fighting in these rooms to be seen and heard, for our leadership to be amplified in a way that gives us the secret sauce to the win. Remember, neoliberals and the right wing, they come and steal our ideas all the time. They come and poach our best people all the time. They play identity politics better than anyone. 100%. It's a reason, because it works. Meanwhile, we over here talking about some values. Your values should be winning too, because people do need to eat. People do need shelter. In the Chicago Public Schools, we have nearly 20,000 students that are unhoused. Our union has to win relief for those children. That is an imperative. And in order to do that, we needed a mayor who could hear the idea of doing it. No, a school district cannot become a housing agency. That is ridiculous. But what a mayor can do, who's in control of the schools and the Chicago Housing Authority, is create a lane for those young people and their families to be put on top of the list. What they can do is invest more money in public and, I like the word and, affordable housing. The mayor is not the point. Again, I use the car analogy for a reason. It's the vehicle. It's not the destination. That's why we got to fix up that car or decide to go buy another one. Because we need a vehicle to get to affordable housing. We need a vehicle to get to fully resourced schools. We need a vehicle to get to mental health care clinics reopening. In 2011, Rahm Emanuel closed them down.
Yeah.
And now the mental health care clinic is the red line. CTA. Another public good that is being depressed by the austerity.
Yeah.
So the we and us matters because politics is about addition. Movement is about addition. You don't win without more and. So this idea of the win is embedded in who I need to win with. So yes, I'm going to struggle with this room. I'm going to talk about this room, and I'm going to love on this room too. I need you. I need you. I need everyone in here and then some. So we say brother, sister, sibling in the labor movement. And it is the best thing to say in any movement, because if we do not connect in love and commitment for each other, all of this hard work is impossible because we have already met ourselves. We have already met ourselves. And so this idea that any individual can do it by themselves, that is a lie straight out of hell. Donald Trump ain't out there by himself. He's out there with Elon Musk. Yep. He's out there with a whole bunch of white men who have been treated poorly for like generations. But we're taught to be exceptional, to be singular, because it's a losing effort. So the people who teach you that are the people who have crowds and connections and ecosystems, which is why they keep winning. And our children are taught to get theirs and to go outside of their neighborhood. Think about what we tell black and brown children who go to public schools. Teachers do this wrongly. Think about what their families tell them. Man, you got to get your education so you can get out of here. Where? Your home? The place where people love you? To go work for them? Who have marginalized your neighborhood, your community, your home, your family, your experience? So we have to be really clear about defining where power exists. It exists in the plural. We have to be very clear about what solidarity is. People think solidarity is agreement. Solidarity is disagreement. Yeah. And a commitment to the conclusion. That's why you take votes. Right. That's why you have debate. Real solidarity is born in the fact that I don't agree with you, and we're going to do this together and see what happens because we think this is the way we're going to go. That's solidarity.
As I hear you speak, I think about just like how that sort of the idea of solidarity as you describe it is one that is at the center of the narrative of a lot of movement building. But the practice of it is actually very different. Holding coalitions of powerful institutions and significantly less powerful groupings of people or organizations, it's always incredibly hard because often the institutions behave, each one of those says like, well, my members or my people or my interest. And then you're sort of stuck in a conversation of like mine versus yours versus that. And more often than not, the sort of coalitions are very tactical, like for the purpose of achieving this one thing. But you have chosen, you and the Chicago Teachers Union for a long time, right, has chosen to actually build, to remain in permanent relationship and like generative, growing struggle with institutions and organizations outside of itself. And to build tables where sometimes you lose the debate and sometimes the vote doesn't go your way. A lot of times, okay. And it begs the question of like why? And you have said it, but also tell us again, because I think it's not, in New York, we used to have a table that held, and then like it held long enough to shift the balance of power at the state Senate, and then the powerful forces said no más, and broke the coalition and sort of permanently fractured that very fragile relationship of solidarity. So why do you keep at it?
These are good questions. They are, because they're thoughtful and they come from experience and doing the work. And I appreciate them. Thank you so much for thinking about this, because you're busy. And you thinking about this conversation as you had in the introduction, and then how intentional these questions are. That's love. Thank you. I actually think that we've reached the limits of the coalition that you just described. we have in Chicago. And I think what you just described about the state senate, again, I'm here because you all have done this. I think if we're not in anticipation mode, that will be what becomes of us too. Mm-hmm. So I'm proposing that we change our idea of what a labor union is. I don't think that we should just be the Chicago Teachers Union, period. I think we need to build a thing that creates membership for the people that we are in coalition with, because our money and our might cannot prevent the change that we have created with people who don't have the money and the might. So how do you create a space where the people you need are parents, the families, and the community organizations we are in coalition with, where they get the same vote you get? How do you create a space where you don't come with me when I'm on strike, but I come with you when you're on strike? And what is a strike for the community? Is that a rent strike? What is a strike for the community? Is it stop surveilling my neighborhood strike? How do you define strike for community? And what does it look like for a labor union who understands strike in the context of a contract, a collective bargaining agreement? And then how do you create space for that? Look, the strike has been one of the most powerful tools to expedite transformation in Chicago. 2012 completely changed my life. Right? That was proof that this thing could work, because we were not out there by ourselves, and we shouldn't have been out there at all, so says everyone else. And it reshaped the political dynamics in the city, which became the vehicle under which we were able to further connect with the electorate in Chicago, because we have already been connecting. That said, we've reached our capacity. So this idea of common good bargaining, what is common good unionism? Yeah. Like, we know what the bargaining is. It's proposals. It's, us having open bargaining for the very first time in this cycle, and inviting environmental justice organizers to come negotiate with us in front of everyone, right? From Outgale Gardens, a housing project on the far south side of Chicago. You're at the table with us, but are you really at the table with us? Right? Do you feel the ownership of that table in the ways in which the members feel who are paying dues? So how do you create a common good unionism that overcomes the division of coalition, the feelings of superiority and inferiority, the understanding that your fate is tied to my fate, and how solidarity really works within unequally yoked partnerships? Does that make sense? So I think that's what we're thinking about. That's what I'm thinking about right now, is how do we create a different type of unionism, and how do we lead on that in a way that reforms organization and shifts power dynamics from the mighty union to the table of people who said that they wanted to. That could also include union.
So you're talking about like building almost like another layer of connective tissue, like a new skin that connects all these independent nodes of organizing and people in a way that makes them all not just be sort of relating through whatever boundary of institution they belong to, but actually relating to each other in addition to that.
People are the institution.
Yeah.
We really get confused by these like artificial institutions. CTU is only as good as the people who are leading, participating, organizing, engaged in CTU. Community, Kenwood Oakland, same thing. Brighton Park neighborhood, same thing. LSNA, same thing. And I think we've experimented with it. We have an organization called UWF.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a collection of some of the same people, but they do politics with each other. They do electoral politics with each other. And if UWF doesn't exist, we don't win the mayor's race. Right. So we've had an experience in coming to the table and all of us kind of like wearing UWF, not CTU, not, you know, this organization, not that organization, but we're wearing UWF, right? So that's the height of our coalition work in the electoral space. What does it look like, though, to redefine labor? Because everyone in our coalition is a worker.
Yeah.
Everyone is. So why don't we define it like that? What would be the impediment to that? And wouldn't that be more powerful? Think about who our enemies are. Think about the networks that they have close to them, right? Think about Project 2025 right now. Yeah. Did they fight about who had a vote, or did they just put out a position paper on how to end democracy?
Right. I want to move to the conversation about the sort of the election. So the story, as I understand it, is United Working Families and CTU and just a vast collection of large and small groups and individuals really like succeeded in touching, going deeply into the beautiful mosaic of Chicago to invite people into imagining a new future and winning and convincing a majority of people to act together. All these folks brought a set of demands, aspirations of what was contained in that possible future. And then you do this incredible thing of you win, you get the car. And then you're like, oh shit, the car. But then you get the car and you realize, wow, this car is really messed up, it's really broken, but we have this whole list of things that we want to do that we thought we were going to do with this car. And now we're the owners of the car. So how do you hold the aspirations that were contained in that beautiful election? And how do you then relate that list of ideas, long expected, urgent things that people want and need, and how do you hold them with care while recognizing this car is like barely starting and we're learning some of us are learning how to drive? How do you sequence that? And how do you go from the moment of election to transition to sort of beginning the governance? And what do you do with that? I found my new
therapist, y'all. I swear I just found her. You reading my journal?
Maybe. No.
But I do know someone you talk to. So. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't. But we're going to try some things. Scope and sequence is an important part of this. How you form and reform relationships is a part of this. How you practice solidarity is probably the priority of this.
Right.
That's why I focus in on solidarity, because solidarity is not agreement. It is both debate, struggle, it is voting, it is consent, it is struggle. The act of solidarity gets you to where you need to be because you're engaged with each other. You bring different ideas. So how do we do this? I actually think we got to do a better job at participating in solidarity, which that's going to be hard because we are taught we're taught that when you win, you get the spoils. That's what we're taught. And I don't care if you're in the left, the right, or in the middle. You are taught that when you win, you get better. No one tells you that winning is winning, and you get to celebrate the win. But the thing that you've won is not designed for the people in this room who are interested in the type of transformation. So your spoils, right, Is that what they call it? Winner gets the spoils? It's really spoiled. What we get is what has already been done. And what has already been done is austerity. What has already been done is traumatic. What has already been done is cuts, closures, consolidations, privatization. That is what you won. So you have to tell people like, yo, ain't nowhere in here for any of that stuff we was talking about.
Yeah.
There's no bathroom for it. There's no office for it. There's nothing here that helps you get the equity and justice that we were fighting for. And then you have to deal with, well, you told me, and how come it ain't for us? Because it is for everyone else that wins. Lessons from freshman year of movement co-governance is telling people we can't govern in this car.
Yeah.
Because if we govern in this car, I'm going to increase your trauma. And you're going to hate me. We have to tell them that we're fighting to govern. So here's the thing. In order for mental health care clinics to reopen, rich people got to pay their fair share.
Right.
So we got to go on a revenue campaign. And we got to name names again. We got to practice solidarity. We got to build a bigger coalition. Or we got to build a different type of common good labor space that includes them, and them. Because austerity means that the only people paying for it are the people who can't pay for it, which means that there's nothing there for you because those who have already gotten it ain't going to give that up. So we have to think about what it means to fight to govern. Mm-hmm. And fighting is what we do know how to do. It is kind of a comfortable space.
Yep.
And so you have to reform the fight. What is the next fight you're picking? And why are you picking that fight? And who does that put you in opposition to? And then how does this newly formed space that you have won help with that fight? The only way we win is if we keep fighting. And the fight is, it's a struggle, and it's a continuous struggle. There's no destination in this, y'all.
Yeah.
If there was a destination, we would already be there. All of these brilliant people, from Harriet Tubman to Ida B. Wells to Karen Lewis, people who have tried this before. And I know Karen was brilliant. You know, I sat at her feet, if you will. If anyone could figure it out.
Yeah.
But it's a continuous struggle. So we have to define and redefine. We have to clarify and clarify. And we have to fight for the next thing. This is how hopefully this makes sense to people in here. I'm thinking about this stuff as a video game. Y'all are old enough for video games in here. Mario Brothers, right? Nintendo.
The only video game I know.
So Mike Tyson Punch-Out was pretty cool. The same era. But at any rate, they're looking at me like they have no idea what I'm talking about. But it's cool. You remember on the first level, you go through it, it's got cool music, and you know it's upbeat, and you figure it out. You get 3 lives to figure it out, or you restart the game and get 3 more lives. But whatever the case is, you get that level. But then you get to that second level, and it's dark on that level. It is literally black on that level, and the music is more ominous. And then there are new obstacles, same obstacles too, though. Like you can still see similarities, but it's darker and it moves faster and the monsters are bigger. So some of what I learned on that first level is applicable to me on that second level. But there are new obstacles, there are new monsters, there are new villains. How do we tell people that that's what we're doing? Yeah. We're getting from level to level to level. And each time we're going to another level, we are learning new things. We are employing new strategies. We are meeting new villains, right? But it's the work that helps you see those things. So the best thing that I can say about the lesson is the same lesson that I learned before we got here, is that the only way we get here is through struggle. And the only way we struggle is if we pick in fights. And the only way we pick in fights is if we're doing the work. And if we're doing the work, we're adding new people to the work because we have new fights. But we have to reposition our lineup, because now you got a mayor. Now you have new city council people, and now you got new villains. And the game is moving faster. And the needs have also increased because you got a fascist running for president who has said very clearly that everything that people care about in this room, he don't give a goddamn about. And we haven't created the environment or the ecosystem for us to lead and amplify in the way that makes us most comfortable. If there's anything that you learn from Chicago, is that you get to change the terms of the debate. And you get to do that through organizing. So you don't have to debate whether or not there should be peace in Gaza.
Right.
That's not a debate. It's not a debate. Children should be alive.
Yeah.
But it is a debate because we're not doing the work to create the type of debate that helps us understand that children are off limits, always. And we love all of our children. In Israel and in Gaza, in Chicago and in San Francisco, Sudan and in South Africa. We love our children. And so how do you organize that? How do you create the political will for children to be protected, for children to be resourced, for children to be loved, right? So you struggle to get that to be the thing. And then we compete on who love them the most. Right now in Chicago, we have an elected school board that people are vying for. We've changed the debate whether or not black families get an opportunity to elect people who will be accountable to resource in their schools. Now the debate is, do you choose this one or that one? It's the progression, right? Our work has been successful. We've expanded democracy in Chicago by bringing in an elected school board. We have increased the likelihood that women cannot go poor and have a baby by offering the most generous parental leave for the Chicago public schools, which, by the way, is dominated 80+% of women workers. We have abolished sub-minimum wage. We have given paid time off. These are all things that have been done within the last year, but the Chicago Tribune keep telling you it's chaos.
They'll never tell you that story. Yeah. That's right. Well, I know we have 20 minutes, so we are going to move to questions, but I have a list of questions that was handed to me in paper and I managed to abandon somewhere. So thank you. Let's see. Okay, so there are many interesting questions. Prepare your questions too. What are the biggest learning challenges for CTU? How do county and state politics matter? How do you deal with police unions? And how do you address budget challenges facing Chicago public schools? Sorry, I mean, we could spend 20 minutes on that question, sorry.
That's not a question. That's like, it's not a question. How do we deal with police unions? They're not a union. All right, what's the next one?
Okay, so
but in Chicago, you had the Black Patrolmen's League. I would submit that they behave more like a union than anything. So there's a tradition and a history in Chicago where like segregation gives you nationalistic tendencies. Yeah. Like it's supposed to. That's the point of segregation, right? Well, one of the points. And through that, you get black, police officers that are patrolling, in their spaces, but they're patrolling with people who don't value black people. Mm-hmm. And so that league helped to give confidence in that there could maybe be public safety and the way that they behaved in pushing for the types of changes that reflected the needs of their neighbors. So big ups to that space and period of time in Chicago history. What was the next one?
Well, yeah, this is a totally separate. It's how do you address the budget challenges facing Chicago public
Rich people
schools?
got to pay their fair share. Y'all, this is not complex. The complexity is that when you put Bring Chicago Home on the ballot, is that you have a real estate industry that has a lot of money and does not want to share any of it, right? And so you got to put rich people in a position of where they have to continue to defend why it is okay for 20,000 children to be unhoused. You have to put rich people in a position to say that they don't care about the whole of us. Now, I don't think everyone feels that way, right? I don't paint with broad strokes. And it is a fact that in the state of Illinois, former resident Ken Griffin and the members of my union are paying the same proportionate amount of taxes. How? When you are a multi-billionaire. That is inherently unfair. And he wrote a $26 million check when we were trying to change the structure of taxation in the state of Illinois, right? Now he's gone and helping out Ron DeSantis in Florida, right? Good riddance, and we're still there with this unfair tax system. So what we have to do in Chicago is do the same thing until we get it. There is no way to combat austerity without a different taxing structure in our state. There's no way to fund schools effectively with the way in which taxes are collected currently. We're gonna need to fix that. And we're gonna have to be very clear about taxation and rich people paying their fair share. Period, the end. Even Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States, is saying this. This is now a mainstream concept.
Yep. We hope she holds it.
No, we
the
pray,
pressures,
we hope,
the pressure,
we work.
yes, I
all
know.
of that,
Well,
yeah, everything.
we have to elect her. So one question that I meant to ask before, and I'll come back to these, is so the coalition, both you as a Black labor leader, as a woman,
Oxymoron.
and also the mayor as a Black leader, are enduring, facing incredible, very personal, very vicious attacks. And so can you tell us how you engage with that, and what sometimes things that come as an attack maybe also have a substance that needs to be considered? I'm not saying that's the case in these cases, but for people in power, the critiques are plentiful, right? All the time. They sort of rain all the time on you. And critiques can be ill-intended, and they can be sometimes ill-intended and substantive. And so how do you hold that? How do you separate sort of the substance from the delivery or something like that? And more importantly, in this moment of governance, or dealing with the broken car, what do you do with that? How do you hold the substance of what might be ill-intentioned, not ill-intentioned, and how do you make it help you do the work for the people?
Playground rules. You hit me, I get to hit you back. Honestly, I think you have to be unapologetic in the ways that they're unapologetic. They put their pants on one leg at a time. I put my pants on one leg at a time. True story. Look, I'm human. It's tough. I'm also a history teacher. This is what they do. And thank you for telling me that we're leading powerfully. But also this, and Emma and I have been talking about this a lot. Would you prefer Rahm Emanuel and Ken Griffin?
Right.
Or would you prefer a woman who lives on the south side of Chicago with 3 children who has influence? Moms for Liberty shouldn't be the only ones who get to say something. Why can't I say something? Right? Here's the other thing about it. I don't represent Stacy. I represent 30,000 members. See, I have base. I am not representing my vote. I'm representing either the consensus or the majority of my union. That is very different from what a Ken Griffin gets to represent. He gets to represent his vault of money. We get to represent the hopes, dreams, aspirations of thousands of people in the city of Chicago. And then there's an extra layer to who I'm accountable to because we've committed to coalition work. So I'm also representing that in leadership because, again, we've taken votes. We've landed on this thing, and this is the thing we're doing. So this idea, they love to make it about an individual. That's why the power is always in we and us. You can fight me if you want to, but what about them back there or them over there? Good luck with that, homeboy, right? You have to stay grounded in the why and the we. I am not important without the movement. I'm important to my children and my husband and my mom and my dad and the people who love me because they have to, right? That's where Stacy's singular importance lives. But my importance in leadership is only because people said yes to this thing that I get to amplify and represent. But understand that the power of the Chicago Teachers Union, the Chicago Project, our coalition is within our solidarity. I have to be clear about that at all times. And I am, quite frankly, because it actually makes me more protected, supported, and powerful. It is a game of addition. And being grounded in that, look, racism is not going anywhere anytime soon. So, you know, watching our vice president navigate this is helpful because now I don't have to explain to my parents what's happening. They're watching it in real time. And to be fair, I love my movement. But the proving process happened within my caucus before it happened on the front page of the Tribune. And that one was far more intimate and sharper than anything that the editorial page gives me. Right. That shit is vapid, flat, and like nonsense. But the idea of building power and getting consent from people who have everything to lose, get out of that fire.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, hearing you say this sort of reminds me of just how different it is to have leaders who understand and sort of their lived experience what it is to belong to people, to actually be like hold in your bones the idea that you belong and that we belong together. And this is a moment where you mentioned, sort of alluded to Trump, or maybe said his name, boo. But you know, we have we live in a moment of one of the two major parties deeply controlled now by very divisive, hateful, xenophobic, racist forces with a communicator at the top that insists and benefits from the politics of hate. And who is succeeding actually attracting many people from who were traditionally part of sort of the Democratic base. Men of color in particular feel sort of a certain kind of affinity to some of the discourse. And it seems so hard to actually build the kind of majority coalition that you built, that you all in Chicago helped build, that both has labor forces, has sort of progressive, liberal, middle class, maybe even liberal elites, and that is deeply rooted in working class Black communities and Latino communities and immigrant communities in Chicago. That seems so hard to hold. I can say that in New York, and this is maybe sad to say, but true, The coalition that elected Eric Adams was really a multiracial working class coalition of Black and Latino voters, labor unions, Wall Street, and real estate. A very powerful coalition. He won by just a little bit, by 7,000 votes. 7,000 votes. It's like 2 high schools, actually. And it could have gone the other way. But the forces that were represented by the other side are higher income, sort of liberal New York. And from where we sit with the possibility of an election in 2025, the challenge for us is to figure out how do we actually become the force that represents multiracial working class New York, and that truly holds those interests, and that can win. And I would lie if I said we have it figured out. We don't. In some ways, when at the Working Families Party we talk about sort of win with the votes you have and build the electorate you want. But when you win with the electorate as it exists, like what you end up with is more of the neoliberal austerity policies, because the power structures that demand that are still there. So just to close, the power structures that you walked into are still there. And can you just say how you are, a year into governing, still like sustaining that coalition, that magical formation that brought the
We're
mayor
not sustaining it.
Okay.
It's impossible to sustain the coalition that you brought with you, because the purpose was to get there. Now it's a new purpose. You got to have new agreements. You got to make new commitments. You got to take new votes. You got to have new debates. And so I think we're in that phase. So to answer that question, but great questions. Black men should be disaffected and pissed off, and they should. And all men who are socialized within the concept of capitalistic America should be taken with Donald Trump. I mean, why wouldn't they? He-Man. Superman.
Yeah.
Batman. We are force-fed masculinity to the nth degree, and black men never get to enjoy that in this country. So saying I want that means that they watched cartoons, Popeye.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not kidding you. These are the things that we are socialized on. It doesn't surprise me that that's what people want. We're expecting people to think about it in dimension. When? At what point? What space do you have? Like, if you go to public school, you're taking a test. You're not having debates. You're not having debates. You're not even reading anything except for a passage to bubble in A, B, C, or D. A passage, not prose, not the Invisible Man, not Native Son, not The Fire Next Time, not Beloved. You're not engaging with literature or historical fiction in any way that helps you situate yourself in capitalism and white supremacy. So why would those men have anything to say in contrast to He-Man?
Yeah.
Because that's in abundance. I love a good old Iron Man movie. Right? What I am saying, though, is that's why Chicago's important.
Yeah.
Vitally important. So here's the thing, and I'm going to tell everyone a secret. Brandon Johnson being mayor of Chicago, black man who lives on the west side of Chicago in one of the most violent neighborhoods in the city, is intentional. Because he gets to now organize Black Chicago. He gets to open up pathways that were unavailable to us before. Remember, progressives look like this room everywhere in the world. In order for progressives to win in the dimension that they need to win, to truly implement a better car, it's going to have to be blacker. It's going to have to be browner. It's going to have to be more female. And you can't do that with the same formula that we have employed. Now, I'm not pissing on our formula. I'm not. We're here. That is not an indictment of it. It has to grow and expand. And we are being told that black men are still not in overabundance within our movement in Chicago in this moment. We still haven't intentionally went to have the conversation and the debate, right? These are things that we have to do. Brandon Johnson, mayor of Chicago, makes it easier, and the task is still there.
Yeah. All right. Well, I recognize that we are 2 minutes away from closing, and I tried to select some of the questions. Not all the questions got asked. Let's do one question from the floor.
You don't get to ask the question. It's going to be the hardest question in the room.
Hi, Stacey. The attacks that have come on the Johnson administration have been unceasing, not even before day one. You know, before, I remember reading headlines about how before he was even elected, he was getting blamed for incidents of disorder in downtown Chicago. So we know the kind of attacks that come against any kind of attempted working class governance like this. But it seems like at this point, at the end of freshman year, the attacks are working in the city in the sense that the poll numbers don't look good for Brandon Johnson. You've got years, much more is going to happen in his first term. Many opportunities to turn that around, but I'm curious about what the plan, I mean, if that's your assessment, that it is sort of a, after freshman year, the attacks have succeeded in their purpose, and then if so, what is the plan to turn around things so that this is not just a one-term working class mayoralty?
Well, I don't get to determine that. The people get to determine that. So what doesn't fail us, Micah, is this idea of the town hall and the army. The town hall is where people are right now, but they're in a town hall without clarity about the scope and sequence. And that's what leadership has to do right now. We have to make presentation of scope and sequence. But if your leaders are searching for the bathroom in the new spaces that we now inhabit, right, it's a little difficult to get that out there. So what are you saying? You're saying, how do we get to another term? I think that's, did I hear that well? That is the question. How do you get there? So I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm talking to more people outside of Chicago who are practicing this, right? Again, you all did it first. Who are the people who have reflection on what worked, what should have worked better, and what didn't work? Who are the people who are invested in a generational project of transformation? Who are the people who can help translate and interpret that you do not make seismic equitable just change in a 3-year cycle, because the 4th year you're running for re-election, right? How do we convey that this is a project, not an election? How do we convey that this is the work to transform spaces to reflect the common good and the will and the needs of people, and not just winning on election day? Right? We can't be confused that the destination was the 5th floor. That's not the destination. And you don't get a destination in struggle. I don't know if you get a destination in capitalism. If you are working class poor, or if you're poor, or if you're female, or if you're anything but, well-heeled, moneyed, white, and male. I don't know that. But what I do know is that our values are still our values. The work remains. This idea of co-governance creates a rubric where, of course, that's where you're failing, because you believe that you're governing something that you're not governing. What we have in place everywhere in this country is something that does not reflect what people need. And if you are governing that, of course you're going to fail at it, Because to govern that means you're hurting people. You're closing schools. He says, I'm not closing schools, right? So he's failing. To govern with the dynamic we have now means that we're going to continue the same types of tax structures and not have advocates at the top going for that, right? But if you say, well, no, rich people got to pay their fair share, then of course he's failing. So what I would submit is that the work that we have to do is manyfold. Number one, we got to find new people because our capacity, we're right there, right? So I'm in New York. I want to meet the people who have had the experiences, who have done great things and who would have done it better and whatever lessons they learned. Two, I need translators for the left to be able to create spaces in which people get to have the debate again, create new agreements, make new commitments, and understand a different type of scope and sequence because it's not the same scope and sequence it was before 23. And then I also need people to understand that the world we talk about and theorize is just as popular or just as potent and powerful as we talk and theorize. We talk about racism, sexism, misogyny, white supremacy all day long in our little study groups, on our book meetings, but we don't talk about it in terms of how it is actually being meted out in the spaces in which we inhabit, right? We reinforce it. Why are you asking me a question about what they put in a headline in the Chicago Tribune? Ask me a question about what they put out in these times. Like if we on the same page, your question is not about who we are trying to beat and what their opinion is. Their opinion is always going to be we're trash. We're beating them. And we're beating them until they get the ball back. And right now we still got the ball. So we winning. You see the shift in the thought process and the perspective on that? See, the left has got to come to terms with their rubric. You can't call them the ops and then take all of their grading materials and assign me a F. It's incongruent. So what is our rubric? Because the people that put them there, those are the people who did the work to knock the doors, to make the phone calls, to have the debates, to come to the consensus, to reach the agreements. Those are the people who have to build the rubric. Those are the people who have to assign the grade, I'm a teacher, so I'm given to this, I'm sorry, who have to assign the grade. I'd be damned if Ken Griffin, I'd be damned if Rahm Emanuel or David Axelrod gets to tell us how well we're doing. When they were doing well, black women were being fired from public schools because they were privatizing. When they were doing well, black children were being pushed out of their schools. When they were doing well, black children were watching the Cabrini Greens get torn down and they in a classroom. When they were doing well, mental health clinics were closing. When they were doing well, we were doing dirt ball bad. Now parents have paid time off to go to parent-teacher conferences, and goddamn, we're terrible. Be clear about who's assigning what and to whom and why. And also be powerful in creating the spaces in which you get to amplify, define, and create the win that we need, and then organizing it in the spaces where people who, one, need it the most, and two, the people who are going to show up. And that's our work right now. That's the work of leadership right now, to redirect, to move that ship in a different direction. And it takes a minute because we've never had this before. So both grace, commitment, and an engagement in the debate and the creation of the new agreements is going to be necessary to get us, to the next level of the video game.